Welcome you all to Believers IAS Academy, and in this today's topic of discussion, we will be understanding what precedent rule is. So I think by now it might be pretty evident as to why we are discussing about the precedent rule, because of what's currently going on. And if we have to see what has happened, the precedent rule has been extended by about 6 months more in the Manipur region. So in this today's video, we will understand what precedent rule is, and even for that matter, why an extension of 6 months, or can there be more extensions in terms of the time period. And we will also understand the different constitutional provisions respected to precedent rule. And in a nutshell, we will try and understand what precedent rule per se is in this today's particular video. Let's begin. So precedent rule generally means that when a situation arises, when the president understands that there is a situation which demands the center's direct rule over the state, right? When the constitutional machinery of a particular state breaks down, and if the situation arises such that the direct has to completely take over the state's control, right? Due to what? Due to the failure of constitutional machinery. So this situation we call it as the precedent's rule. And what is the article? It is the Article 356 of the Indian Constitution, which states or which allows precedent rule or the president to impose the direct central rule in any state if there's a failure of the constitutional machinery. So what I'm trying to tell you is the center absolutely becomes more powerful as compared to the state. So now what are the consequences of it? So even before we dwell into it, let's try and understand what precedent rule is in detail. So precedent rule, the definition is clear. It's Article 356, right? And it is also called as state emergency. We also called it the constitutional emergency, correct? And in some cases we also refer to this as a governor emergency as well, right? So what happens here in the state government is either suspended or dissolved, and the governor of the particular state on behalf of the president takes charge of the entire state. And also it is very important to keep in mind that in the precedent rule, it is important that the suspension of state government and imposition of direct rule by the center is what happens in the precedent rule, meaning which it kind of affects the federal feature of the Indian Constitution, right? So that is what the exceptional case of precedent rule is all about. Now, what are the constitutional provisions or the constitutional basis for precedent rule? If we have to see, first is the Article 356, where it clearly states that if the governor of that particular state reports to the president of the country that the situation has arisen, and if the state the situation such that the state cannot function as per the constitutional provisions, so now is when the president feels the need for the imposition of precedent rule under Article 356. And then what is Article 365? Even that is also precedent rule, but on a different condition. It states that if a state fails to follow the directions of the union government or the center, if any state does not go in accordance with what the center is saying, or let's say if it is not in accordance with the center's requirement, then according to under Article 365 of the Indian Constitution, the precedent rule can be imposed. So these are the two important constitutional bases through which precedent rule can be imposed, which is very important, the articles. And now let's understand the grounds for imposition as well, right? So precedent rule can be imposed when the first and foremost reason is when as we discussed, the state government is unable to function according to the provisions laid down by the Constitution. And also there are other reasons as well, right? And also if the governor recommends to the president citing constitutional breakdown, and if you see what happened in Manipur is pretty much the same thing, right? So of course breakdown of law and order, insurgency, political instability. So these are all the feeding factors as to why precedent rule was implemented or imposed in the Manipur region, correct? So now I hope this grounds of imposition is very clear. Now, what are the different key features of the presidential rule? As in, what happens during a presidential rule is what we will be seeing in this, and how president rule, the process, how it is input. So first is the approval. So first and foremost thing, a president rule, president does not have the right that he directly announces that president rule will be imposed in a particular state. No, because first and foremost thing, he needs the approval by the parliament. And once the the parliament, the proposal to impose president rule is put in the parliament, is placed in the parliament, it has to be approved within 2 months by both the houses. I mean the parliament, the Lok Sabha and also Rajya Sabha has to approve within 2 months, right? And what is the majority? It's not the special majority, it's the simple majority which is required, with which each of the houses of the parliament, the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, right? With what? Simple majority. They have to approve, and once after the approval, then it is considered that the president rule is imposed. So now what is the duration? It is initially valid for 6 months. So whenever president rule is imposed, it can be imposed for a minimum period of 6 months, and further, depending on how the situation turns out to be, right? If the situation is all okay, fine, it can be curtailed, it can be revoked back. And if the situation is still out of control, it can be extended, but only up to 3 years with approval after every 6 months. So now I hope it is clear why the 6 months, it is extended for another 6 more months. So it is not just random that they, thought of, postponing it just for 6 months. 6 months because that is provided in the constitution. So now, of course, understanding this, it is also important the fact of 44th Amendment Act 1978, right? Because this particular amendment added a safeguard feature for this president rule. Let's look what that is. So first is the election commission has to certify that elections can't be held, correct? And most importantly, the extension of the president rule cannot be held or cannot be extended beyond 1 year. And what are the two instances when the presidential emergency, is the president rule is not extended, cannot be extended up to 1 year? The two important factors is when the national emergency is in force. Another thing, when the election commission certifies that elections can't be held in that particular state. So that is the only time, or let's say the safeguard that the 44th Amendment Act has brought in to ensure that the president rule does not get extended beyond 1 year unless these two things are in place, right? I hope this is clear. Now, what happens during president rule? Of course, it is very important to know the status of the state government. So as we can see, the governor, who is the agent of the government, the center, takes over the administration in the name of president. It is clear. Now, the state assembly, what happens to the state assembly? Will it get dissolved or suspended? It can be both. It can either be dissolved, but in the most cases, it will be suspended. And since the state government is suspended, now who makes laws? It is the parliament. Parliament will start making laws for the state, the subjects, matter on the state list. And also simultaneously, ordinances can also be issued by the president when the parliament is not in session. So I hope this is also very clear. Now we have studied about what president rule is, the constitutional basis, right? The features of president rule and how, what are the grounds on which, it can be imposed. Now we should also, kind of know the revocation process, how it can be revoked. So now who revokes it? It is the president, who can revoke this anytime by a fresh proclamation by the what? A political party. Let's say, for example, a political party shows majority support in that particular state, and it can claim that, no, we are, back to our, let's say, census, and then, we are okay that now we can form a government. So that is when, a situation when, the president rule can be taken back, revoked. And for this particular thing, we don't need any parliament approval, or for that matter, even president can revoke it, right? So at the end, it is also important as to understand the different, or let's say one important judicial cases that formed the underlying support for let's say to stop the misuse against or let's say to stop the misuse of the precedent rule. One important such case is the SR Bommai case 1974, where the Supreme Court ruled that precedent's rule is subject to judicial review. One of the basic structure of the Indian Constitution is the concept of judicial review, right? So SR Bommai case 1994, it clearly stated that the precedent rule can be judicially reviewed, or it is subject to judicial review. And above all, central government must give valid reasons stating as to why they need to impose precedent rule, right? And also the parliamentary approval, even in terms of imposing, right, that is a mandatory factor, is what was outlined by this SR Bommai case. So at the end, it is also important to know few criticisms of the precedent rule. One being the political motives. Doesn't mean you impose precedent rule because there is a personal political agenda hidden, or in order to ensure that the political motives of certain political party or the majority ruling party at the center, right, gets satisfied. Doesn't mean, or let's say if any state is going against the center, right, doesn't mean political party or the majority political party at the center, who's in the government, doesn't mean they impose precedent rule to take control or to impose their rules over them. So that is what the point is talking about. It shouldn't be used for political motives. And also another important thing, as we discussed in the beginning, is that the federalism part of the Indian Constitution, the feature, the federalism, gets affected. It violates, the precedent rule violates the federalism and the autonomy of the state. So hence, it is one of the biggest criticism, at least when India considers itself to be a quasi-federal nation, right? And also at the end of the day, we have to also understand that precedent rule has been imposed more than 100 times till date. So that in itself becomes very important to ensure that precedent rule is not a tool that the center has to take control of anything and everything or any state randomly, but a very important and the most powerful tool which has to be used very carefully and precisely to ensure constitutional machinery is working fine and sound, and just so that it doesn't affect the federal feature of the Indian Constitution. So that's all for today's video. We have tried and understood what precedent rule is in detail pretty much. So that's all for today's topic. For more such informative content, please do subscribe to Believers IAS Academy YouTube channel. Signing off, this is Madan Gopal. Have a beautiful day.